started. So first and foremost, thank you all for being here. Once again, we know it is a Saturday, but you prioritize your Saturday to be here with us today. Once again, welcome to the Global Exchange Mentoring Program. That is a collaboration between Pharmacy Initiative Leaders, PILS, which is an organization dedicated to changing the look and feel of healthcare at every stage, which is based in the United States. And we've collaborated with INNOVAMP Healthcare, who is an amazing organization in Africa, really dedicated to innovating, revamping, and innovating Africa also at every stage. So once again, thank you for being a part of this. This is session number 2 of our Global Exchange Mentoring Program, where we're trying to utilize US-based pharmacists and healthcare professionals to really educate, empower, and connect with healthcare professionals in Africa. So once again, thank you for being a part of this. And once again, I want to make sure that everyone knows, please follow PILS and INNOVAMP on all social media platforms, that being Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and we will drop the links in the chat as well throughout the presentation. And I also want to make sure that you all join our PILS INNOVAMP official Telegram, where we have more updates and connections and recaps based on this presentation as well as future presentations in the future. So without further ado, I am going to be able to introduce the speaker. But before I do that, our first 3 gems were discussed during our last Global Exchange Mentoring Program session back in August. And that session was about the power of connection. And in this, we talked about our first 3 gems, that being number 1, everything and everyone is connected. So we're all here today and we are connected to one another because we have the sole purpose of education and empowerment for each other. We also want to let you know that the story of PILS and how it was created is the power of connection as we had personal connections that turned into professional connections that turned into purposeful connections. And then lastly, connections compound both locally and globally. So we want you to understand that every connection you make can be as big or as small as you want, and it's going to be up to you and the other party. So now we're going to go over to some more gems from Dr. Yani Adere, who is an amazing pharmacist. She is a medical science liaison in liver health at Novo Nordisk, and she is currently the head of classroom and careers at Pharmacy Initiative Leaders. So take it away, Dr. Adere.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chandler. And I am so excited to be speaking with you all today. I don't know if you can hear me, but Chandler, just confirm that you can hear my volume really well. Awesome. Okay.
Yes.
So I'm going to get started by introducing myself a little bit, telling you guys about my journey as it relates to the pharmaceutical industry, as what we're going to be discussing today. Is I'm giving an overview of the functional areas in the pharmaceutical industry and discussing about the opportunities that are actually in the industry as well, whether it's internationally or in the US or specifically even in Africa. So I think the best place to get started is by telling you guys about what brought me to the role that I'm in today, and specifically in the pharmaceutical industry. So I'll get started by just kind of walking you through my journey and painting a picture of some of the experiences that I've been able to obtain over the years. So I started out by just when I was in undergrad studying public health and psychology, I started out by understanding that obviously I'm very interested in healthcare, right? So then I looked into what's available for me to obtain in my local job fairs and through my networks. And actually I was able to get a job as an insurance agent assistant at an insurance company called Blue Cross Blue Shields of Georgia. And so there I was really able to understand about health coverage, enrollment processes, what it really takes to actually plan out some of the healthcare marketplace insurance services that exist, and how do we actually improve health insurance awareness within minority communities. And that was a very important piece for me to understand, that everything ties back to the opportunity for patients to actually have access to the right medications at the right time, and also be educated in what they should be seeking for when they're speaking to their providers. So great experience early on. And then I moved into going into pharmacy school. I worked in retail as well as hospital pharmacy. And in these settings in retail, I was, again, forming those bonds and connection with the community by serving as their first kind of encounter to their prescriptions. Before they get their prescriptions, I was able to guide and counsel them through some of the, not just the safety and efficacy of the specific medications that they were getting, but also just making sure that they were comfortable, that other questions that they might not have felt comfortable asking their doctors, or that they did not have time to ask their doctors, were already answered and addressed in that setting. And so I worked in a small independent pharmacy for the most part. And that really allowed me, like I said, to really form bonds with patients and be there in a way that I haven't before previously to this point in my career. And then I got into pharmacy school, right? So this was my first exposure, as in the retail and hospital pharmacy, was really my first exposure into the world of pharmacy as just an intern or shadowing pharmacist. And then I realized that I'm actually very interested in going to pharmacy school. So I went to pharmacy school at Howard University. And while I was there, just based on, and this is just to give you a perspective of how geography makes a difference in where you are, because previously I lived in Georgia and I was in an area that was not fully, a lot of saturation of pharmaceutical industry companies. But I moved north, and Northeast is really where the majority of companies, at least on the East Coast, sit as far as pharmaceutical companies. So just by being closer to those cities like New Jersey, New York, Boston, and being specifically in Washington, D.C., I had a lot of people that came to talk about some of the opportunities that existed in the pharmaceutical industry. And so I was able to truly understand, okay, well, this could be something that I can see myself being interested in. But I do want to emphasize from early on, this was from seeking out those connections and seeking out those experiences and really being clear that what I wanted to do was a little bit different than what I've experienced previously in hospital and retail pharmacy. So my first year of pharmacy school in the summer, I went into business development at Pfizer specifically. And this is, when you think about business development, is really, there's so many portfolio of specific compounds, right? Research deals that happened in the pharmaceutical industry. And basically my role was really assessing to see with the teams, of course, the efficacy, the safety, and cost profiles of the deals to help with decision making. So do we want to keep these deals? Do we want to actually go through with the negotiation for those deals? How does Pfizer want to partner with other company in bringing a certain drug to market and the commercialization of that specific drug? Do we want to eliminate it and don't think that is actually a good fit for Pfizer? So for me at that time, I was really able to see the business side of what it takes to actually partner in certain pharmaceutical companies, or what it's like when a deal breaks down or does not necessarily go through, right? So very great experience early on, but not necessarily super medical. So then I was very curious to see, how do I go into the medical side? How do I actually use some of the stuff that I'm learning in the pharmaceutical industry and actually apply it into my internships and jobs that I was doing at that time? So my second year of pharmacy school, I went into medical affairs. And this is because when I was at Pfizer the first summer, I did my due diligence and really networking, getting to know people, building connections, and understanding that there are other areas and functional areas specifically in the pharmaceutical industry that are best suited for me. And that's how I landed in medical affairs. So while I was there, I was really just kind of doing a lot of reviewing of specific type of literature to improve connections or communication with key opinion leader engagement. I was also able to review some regulatory materials or promotional materials specifically, just a lot of awesome stuff that I did. And just to kind of make sure that I'm saving some of my gems for later, I'm not going to go too depth into every single thing that I did, but basically give me an experience of, okay, now I really like that I'm in the industry, but still able to use my medical or scientific background. So then I just kind of went around in different areas, and really just to keep it very simple, that the Ethiopian FDA should have came first, but to keep it very simple, I just really kind of hopped around to figure out what is really the place that I want to be. And as you can see here, I went from medical affairs in pharma to Ethiopian FDA. I did a rotation in Ethiopia, and I realized even when I was in Ethiopia, and brief background, originally born and raised in Ethiopia and came to the US in high school. So it was really an opportunity for me to go back to my home country and serve in a capacity that would correlate to what I'm trying to do when I get back to the States. So the way that I did it, there was not a formal specific way of interning at the Ethiopian FDA. So I kind of just made connections and say, hey, can I come and review what you do and can I actually shadow you? And a couple of people actually volunteered for me to do that. So I went in there and shadowed a lot of people and worked with them to see what they do at the Ethiopian FDA. Then when I was in the US, I also worked at the US FDA, and it gave me a clear indication of, okay, what are the similarities, differences between those two? But like I said, everything is connected, right? And this is something that we learned from the last gem. Because everything is connected, some of the pieces, some of the important things that I learned at the Ethiopian FDA, I was able to really even see the clear, like I said, how it differentiates, how it makes sense in the US FDA. I was also at the Health Economics and Outcomes Research team at Novo Nordisk, and that was a great experience as well. That's close to medical, more a little bit of research as well. And then I went into marketing at Lilly for a little bit as well. And that's because of my connection with through pills. George at that time was in brand marketing at Lilly. And so I reached out to him and I said, hey, I would really love the opportunity to shadow you. He literally provided a whole experience for me to come out, to fly to Lilly and just really experience that entire team and how it works, right? Ultimately, though, as you can see, I landed in medical affairs because that's near and dear to my heart based on some of the experience that I had. So I now serve as the medical science liaison at Novo Nordisk on the liver health team. And we'll talk a little bit about what does it mean to be medical affairs in-house, what does it mean to be medical affairs field, and potentially what could be next for me as well. I don't necessarily know, but maybe even after this presentation, I could get a better perspective for myself. So that's a little bit of a brief kind of, I guess, journey or map of how I landed here today. So when we talk about the pharmaceutical industry, and again, this is kind of going backward a little bit, but really the focus is what pharmaceutical companies do, in short, is they're involved in the discovery, development, manufacturing, commercialization of drug, right? So they discover it, do a lot of intensive research. They realize, okay, is this something that can go to the next step, the next phase, develop the drug a little bit further. Then if that actually is found to be safe and efficacious in humans, then they manufacture the drug and then actually lead it to the commercialization or marketing of the drug, right? So there's a lot of things that are involved in it, including research, education, business, regulation, working with a lot of government agencies. And this is to really show you the amount of places that a healthcare provider such as yourself and myself could really work within the pharmaceutical industry. It's really endless opportunities in the pharmaceutical industry. And for the sake of being short, moving forward, I will refer to the pharmaceutical industry as either industry or pharma. So I'm not repeatedly saying the long phrase. So just keep in mind, and maybe Chandler, you can put it in the chat, that when I say pharma or pharmaceutical, when I say pharma or when I say the industry, I'm referring to the pharmaceutical industry. So I briefly put this kind of stages of product development on here, and you will Google drug development and you will find very detailed, really just kind of super detailed and deep dive of what the actual drug development is like. I simplified this for the sake of time, for the sake of clarity and simplicity in the way that we're thinking about jobs, and less about the specific processes or steps and sequences that are actually taken in the drug development process. So when you look at this, take it with a grain of salt to understand that it's a very simplified version of what we're trying to do, of the drug development process. So you start with basic science, and this is like, I'm talking about bench research, right? You're in the lab, you really just trying to identify compounds that actually could potentially be something that you want to take to the next level. Then you are in clinical studies, and in clinical studies, you're doing phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 studies, right? So you're assessing the safety, the efficacy of these medications, and then you're taking that from small population to bigger population in phase 2, then going into phase 3, even bigger population, right? And so basically, after you go through these steps is when you get to the regulatory approval stage, right? And then the regulatory approval stage, this is where you would actually deal with the regulatory agencies. You would file an NDA, which is new drug application. And if your drug is approved by the FDA, then you get a product launch, and then post-launch marketing also happens and close to the end of the process, right? So it's very intensive process. Again, very simplified here, but in short, what it really says is that there's a lot of steps, one, and two, it's a very lengthy process, and three, there's so many opportunities embedded in each of these steps in the product development cycle. So what I've done now is I've kind of laid out the functional areas that are actually that are most commonly talked about, that you see and hear about the most in how healthcare providers or pharmacists specifically are actually taking part and taking roles in the pharmaceutical industry. So with that being said, I'll start with research and development. Again, that is a little bit early on with the basic research, the bench science, the lab work, right? And then you get into clinical development. This is when you have phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 clinical trials. And then you have the regulatory affairs, you have medical affairs, as well as commercial, right? And I could have just simply put these in boxes, but the reason I have this arrows going on the going along the stages of the product development is really to show you that not one single particular functional area falls under one single stage of the product development cycle. What you see here is that they all are working simultaneously, parallelly in the background, and happening all at the same time. Meaning, there are some that start more earlier than others. Obviously, you start with research with anything, right? To answer the research question is your goal, and to see if that's actually worth exploring any further. But after that point, once that drug is actually looked at and said, okay, now we want to take it into actual clinical development, a lot of pieces are actually being worked on at the same time. Because the last thing you want to do is be like, okay, yeah, this drug is efficacious, it's safe, I want to bring it to market. And now you want to think about the planning of how you're going to actually form connection with the medical community regarding that particular therapy. Now you want to think about launch and marketing. You don't want to do all of that very close to the end, right? Like, you want to plan everything along so that once you hit approval, it's almost like you had everything already lined up and ready to go, so patients can get these medications right on time, and we're not waiting for a series of steps to happen before we get there, right? So in short, when you think about the different functional areas, always understand that they're happening almost at the same time, with variations, of course, at the start time, but they're all doing their own work in their own lane across the product development stages. And one thing that kind of happened across the board is business development. And that is because the company is always assessing for innovative ways to do therapeutics, or to actually assess technologies that are happening, to see other assets that other pharmaceutical companies are having and wanting to maybe collaborate with. Meaning, it's always a great idea for a business to really see what are the ways that they can enhance their business, they can enhance their innovation through partnership, through deals, and various things. With that being said, the business development aspect really happens across the board. And to be clear, this is based on my readings, it's based on my own experiences. And so when you speak with other people from the pharmaceutical industry and actual professionals from the pharmaceutical industry, you might hear that they might feel like one starts a little bit earlier, one starts a little bit later. But the whole point is, again, they all happen very much parallelly along the stage of product development. So now my favorite part, right? Let's go ahead and do a deep dive into the common functional areas. So the main common functional areas that I thought for the first session of Intro to the Pharmaceutical Industry are commercial, medical affairs, clinical development, and regulatory affairs. So these are, again, if we go back to the previous slide, key pieces in the stages of drug development or product development. So let's start with a little Q&A, right? We want to make sure that we're keeping you engaged. I know a lot more people have joined since I began the presentation. So I want to hear from you guys. And if you're not familiar, that's totally fine. I also want to hear the answer of, I'm not familiar, right? But are you familiar with any of these functional areas or areas in general, roles within the pharmaceutical industry? And if you are, please go into the chat or raise your hand, turn on your camera. Would love to hear from you. No one? I will not rest until I find someone. So whether it's from INNOVAMP or somebody, I would love to hear from you guys. Oh, awesome. The functions are not always clear, okay? Only clinical development. Wow. That's really great to hear. Maybe one of you guys that are commenting in the chat, if you don't mind turning your audio, I would love to hear from you. Maybe Rebecca, you said that you've heard a lot of these, but the functions are not clear. If you have any more thoughts, I would love to hear from you directly and outside of the chat too. No pressure, but kind of. I think one of you raised your hand. Wilson, go ahead.
Drug safety.
Drug safety, awesome, awesome. So what have you heard about it in terms of jobs, or how have you heard about drug safety, and what have you been familiar with so far?
In terms of the toxicological evaluation during the let's say clinical trial process.
Awesome, thank you so much, Wilson. That's great to hear.
Thank you.
These are really, really awesome. It's a great perspective for me to have as I go through the presentation to see where you guys are, some of the places that you've heard of, and then also some of the places that you would love to hear more of, right? So thank you so much for your participation. I hear awesome. Umo, I don't know. I don't want to mispronounce your name. If I do mispronounce any names, I sincerely apologize. Like I said, I am African myself and had to make accommodations to my name to make sure it's not butchered. So please excuse me in advance. But this is great to hear. I see medical affairs, drug development, overall drug safety, commercial, clinical development. But really the consensus is that while you guys have heard of some of these areas, the functions are not always as clear. So that's what I'm here to do today. So let's continue. Awesome. So I'm going to get started with the one that I've heard a good amount of you guys be familiar with, and that's clinical development, right? So clinical development really serves as the crucial bridge between the drug discovery and clinical application, and it really oversees the drug development process from the molecule to the final product. So what you are seeing here is that it really manages operations throughout clinical trial. It's really about facilitating the development of clinical documents. And this could be about when you're thinking about research needs protocol development, right? It needs a lot of procedural documents. So really getting all of those things together, put it in for reports, data tools, statistical panels, plans. It's so many different things that happen into actually forming a clinical development program, right? So as a pharmacist, pharmacists typically will lead teams. They manage the operational aspects through clinical trial. They facilitate, again, the development of these documents and further. But what I do want to emphasize is that this is where the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and then actually like post-marketing, all of this is really along the clinical development stages, right? So let's kind of go a little bit in depth what actually goes into the clinical development roles. And so this is where the next slide is where I want to emphasize a little bit. There's research, and some of you have already mentioned that, like when you want to do toxicology research, when you're just doing bench science research, there's a lot of opportunities in the clinical development and research development, which is a little bit earlier, to discuss, to design studies, to answer specific research questions, to develop new treatments, new technology. So this is really where you get some of your scientific curiosity out of the way by saying, hey, I'm very curious about finding more about this particular therapy and these patients, this particular compound and these patient population. What can I do to learn more? And this is how you actually develop those studies to actually gain a better understanding. You also have clinical supply chain, and this is really from end-to-end supply chain. Obviously, when these drugs are actually coming into market, before they get there, there's packaging, there's labeling, there's distribution of these particular investigational products. So while you're designing the studies, while there's somebody within the clinical development designing the studies, the clinical supply chain specifically is ensuring that the packaging, labeling, distribution of the investigational products to the clinical sites and other expanded programs are actually available and ready. So it's a really, really important piece, but it's really in the background, right? So some people might have project management experience, some people might have clinical experience, but with a lot of like operational supply chain experience. But basically what I'm saying is this particular role or this particular area within the clinical development team does not always have to have a super science background. It can have a little bit of both technical and let's say project management, supply chain type of experience with addition of science. Again, giving us an opportunity to apply it there. There's also clinical development strategy. This is briefly what I mentioned earlier, but basically this is the designing and execution of all clinical trial activities, from the patients to the drug supply to the site experience. So for example, I'll give you an example of what I'm doing. I am the liver health medical liaison within the NASH team, right? The clinical trial team that I work closely with basically manages the sites. They do site selection. That's something, the first thing that you do is like, okay, we have the study planned out, the research is ready to go. Now we need, or the clinical trial processes are ready to go, the protocol development is done. Now I need sites. So they do site selection. Then they do recruitment materials, they do recruitment rules and procedures, regulations. They would activate sites. They would make sure that the patient selection process is appropriate. And throughout this process, they're also adhering to the regulatory guidelines and regulatory interactions to make sure that this is actually meeting all the expectations that FDA has, so that later on, we're not saying, we're ready to actually give you this data that we have gotten through our clinical development process, and they say you did not meet the regulations, right? You did not meet the specific procedures that we have outlined. So basically what I'm saying is they're in constant communication with regulatory early on so that there's no surprises in the process. Then you have clinical risk management. And this is similar to drug safety. Drug safety could be in early clinical development, research development. It could also be specifically sitting in regulatory. So within clinical development, specifically clinical research, clinical risk management is really overseeing all the clinical risk management, safety, surveillance of assigned investigational product, potentially marketed products. As in, if let's say the marketed product is coming back into the clinical development program to be looked at for another indication, then it would also be assessing for safety signals to see, does it match what we've seen in previous patient populations, or is it different here? Is there anything new that's coming up, and how do we deal with that? All of this is under the clinical risk management team within the clinical development roles. So I want to stop here. I know I shared a lot of things. Chandler, if you don't mind putting the question in the chat so I can go back to the slide that has the clinical development role, so we can actually have it open up and discuss it a bit further. So which clinical development role interests you now that you know a little bit more, and tell me why, whether that's in the chat or turning your camera audio on. I want to hear from you all. So if you guys don't mind, I'm going to go back to my chat and see who said clinical development and start calling people out. So again, because I already apologize for mispronouncing your name in advance, no judgments, right? So Sanayaoli, oh God. Sanayaolu.
Yes, yeah. Good evening.
Okay, first tell me how you say your name. And then I know you said you were only familiar with clinical development. Now that you know a little bit more, tell me what you have, what this has shown you, or if you learned anything at all.
Oh, yes. From the clinical development. Okay. For my name is pronounced Sonyaolu.
Okay. Sonyaolu.
Okay, so
I did bad.
No problem. Okay, so from what I've learned now, I'm more interested in, I know about research before, but now I'm more interested in clinical development strategy, because it looks like it involves a lot of planning and organization, and I love to do that. So that's just it.
Thank you so much for that. That's really awesome to hear. And we do have resources that are not that extensive or comprehensive yet, but we'll share that with you post this event, right, Chandler? So that you guys can start looking at some things. And then as we develop them and you know, put more stuff in, we will update and share that document with you, but basically gives you an indication of where you should go to look for these. And a lot of the time, clinical research organizations are a perfect place for you to start if you're interested in a clinical development strategy role or a clinical development role that is any of these. Clinical research organizations or CROs are a great place to start looking for these type of roles. So I would advise you to just literally Google clinical development roles within CROs, or if you say clinical research organization, aka CROs, and then jobs, and you'll be able to see some jobs that might pop up in your specific country or specific region in your country. So I hope that that kind of helps a little bit.
Yes, a lot. Thank you very much.
Awesome, yay. Anybody that said clinical development, do you have any further questions? I know INNOVAMP, I don't know who specifically is from that account, have said clinical development as well. Anything that stands out, if anything at all, from just a little bit more depth that I gave from clinical development roles? Awesome. Well, keep it coming in the chat. Again, this is an ongoing discussion. Don't feel like you have to specifically answer at a particular time. I think the most interesting comment you made was the research can have managerial roles available to PharmDs. Absolutely. With most roles for our background. For PharmDs, yes. Because the thing about it is, right, so there's a lot of people who come into a clinical, for example, employees that have a bachelor's in science, anytime science, right? Or pharmaceutical sciences, a lot of them, they have various roles along the way, but the managerial roles are one that you probably get to by having more experiences. The more you work in clinical trial and understand the true process by working in that specific pharmaceutical company or clinical research organization, the more responsibilities you'll be able to take on those managerial roles. So I know a lot of PharmDs who are clinical trial managers. So they manage all aspects of the clinical program and their specific regions. So to your question, Rebecca, yes, this is the case for most of our background. Most roles of our background, you can have a managerial role as long as you actually have obtained enough years of experience to land a manager role, meaning you know what it's like to work as an individual contributor first before landing a role that allows you to manage other individual contributors. Does that answer your question, Rebecca? Okay, awesome, great. Enoch, I know how to pronounce your name, so point for me.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening, good afternoon.
All right, so I would like you to emphasize more on patient site experience that's under the clinical development strategy. So really more emphasis on the patient site experience.
You want me to give a little bit more in-depth, can you clarify your question, please? I don't think I can hear you that clearly.
Okay, I was trying to say you should give more explanation on the patient site experience, like what patient site experience is all about.
The patient site experience, you said?
Yes.
The patient site experience. So, oh, I see what you're saying on this slide. So what that means is, for example, what are the steps that it takes for you to recruit patients, to screen the patient, to randomize the patient, to actually have them be randomized in the clinical trial for long enough to be followed up even after the clinical trial program has been done. So really making sure that the patients actually come to the specific site to get their medications at the right time, or for example, the frequency of when the medication is supposed to be given, making sure that they're coming in to get their lab exams done, making sure that they're getting all of their, whether it's labs, whether it's checking in from even quality of life, depending on the specific study, right? Just kind of assessing all aspects of the patient while they're actively in the process of going through the clinical program is what that means. And the site experience is what I mean is, so we select a specific site and say, let's say a hospital, right? Or a specific practice, a private practice. As a company selects a private practice or a hospital and say, hey, we want to work with you to make you the clinical trial site for this particular clinical study. And that site will say, great, but we want to make sure that the site is getting the right resources or the right materials to recruit patients appropriately. We want to make sure that the people that work at that site are trained appropriately to actually give, administer, and monitor the safety of these medications. We want to make sure they know how to deal with patients in the first place, right? Are they healthcare professionals that have the bedside manner to handle patients across the clinical trial program. So what that means is, even though I put patient/site experience, I really mean how patients are treated along the clinical development program, as well as how the sites are treated or handled along the clinical trial program. So they're separate, but they kind of go hand in hand, that we want to make sure pharmaceutical industry companies want to make sure that their patients are appropriately being handled throughout the clinical development program, as well as the site is following all the guidelines and is being compliant to all of the regulations as it actually takes in these patients and enrolls continuously for long clinical trials. Because one thing I might have forgot to mention earlier is that these programs could take up to 10 years from basic research, not even up to, it could be more, it could be less, now that we're getting more innovative in the way that we approach clinical development programs. But basically, it could be a really long time. So the study that I'm particularly working on is really an 8-year trial, right? So that takes a long time of relationship building with the sites, making sure the patients have adequate support to actually stay in the study throughout the entire the duration of the trial. So does that answer your question, Enoch? I want to make sure that I've made that very clear before I move on. Okay, awesome, great. Any other questions? And we don't have to get to it right away, but I will continue to explain. I'll continue to check in, the chat. So if you have any questions about the clinical development program or clinical development roles, we'll come back to that. And another thing that we will do is at the end, we will have breakout rooms to recap on some of these opportunities and really see, okay, well, I want to, now that I've learned more, I want to explore, where do I go? Like, we will also talk about that. So don't leave, as that is actually a really great opportunity for us to connect and put some tangible resources and next steps to the discussion that we're having right now. All right, so we already handled that. Now we get to commercial. So the commercial is really an exciting team, right? So commercial is really where the profit is. Let's keep it real. This is where companies actually commercialize the drug. This is teams that actually work to collaborate with other functional areas in the product development cycle and actually bring the drug to market. So that means, okay, how we define the needs for this drug. So let's say, I'll give you an example for myself, right? I work in liver health, but particularly in NASH. NASH is non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, which is a progressive form of NAFLD, which is fatty liver disease. So there's no therapy available right now for NASH. And so what that means is my company has identified, and this is only speaking for myself, not speaking for my company. From being there, I've understood that my company has identified that there's a need out in the patient world that for a specific therapy to handle or to treat NASH, right? So the product has already been identified. The need has already been identified. And this is not just a commercial or medical role. This is business development role. This is across the board. But one that is actually identified, then commercial teams are like, all right, what is out there, right? What other competitors actually could be potential therapy options for patients? What do we have to look forward to? Or even what are things that they're doing that we could be mimicking to do better, right, in clinical development? So with that being said, commercial teams start by identifying really earlier than what a lot of people assume. So because we're kind of going a little bit more foundational discussion today, I won't go in too much depth, but to keep it simple, when people think of marketing, which falls under commercial, basically is the same thing, similar, they think that marketing comes when the drug comes to market. That's not necessarily true. Marketing, planning for marketing processes happen all along the clinical studies, regulatory approval, product launch, and post-marketing. It's happening all in the background. So that is developing a market positioning and branding. What that means is, let me just kind of take it from drugs to make it about pens, okay? So you have identified that you want to bring red pens to market. And let's say there's no other red pens, or the red pens on the market are not the best. You really have to make sure that you create a message for why your red pen is the best pen, right? So that's what we're doing within the commercial teams, meaning they're developing a market positioning so that when the drug comes to market, they know exactly, is it going to be first to market, second to market, third to market? And with that being said, all of that impacts the revenue the company makes, that impacts the future for patients, that impacts future competitors, that impacts the disease area as a whole. So with that being said, it really has to do with creating this creating this position so that when the drug comes to market, it's already received very well. It's designing and delivering innovative pricing and access strategies. What that means is it's awesome you have a drug that is safe and efficacious, is going through the clinical development program with the hopes of being launched. But the reality is if patients can't access it because it's so expensive, there is no point. And Chandler, my counterpart in clinical pharmacy, will tell you that if his patients cannot get the medication, he doesn't care that the most coolest drug is on the market, because his patients cannot afford to pay thousands of dollars per month to get that specific medication. So commercial teams are working in the background to create innovative pricing and access strategies so that the patients can actually receive the innovative therapies that we work as pharmaceutical industry work so hard to bring to market. And then the next thing is the launch campaign. And this is actually so fun and exciting. This is what you would see, for example, if I know in African countries, there's not a lot of direct to patient advertising, but if you were in the US, you might see a commercial come on TV where it would say, this drug is great for this reason, and you should talk to your healthcare provider about this drug. So you do a lot of like fun commercials, just like you would do commercial on TV for, let's say, I don't know, random things like shoes or I don't know, Chandler, help me here, but there's so many commercials on TV for various things like cars, right? The same way in the US, we do that for therapies as well. And we do that for patients to help them get familiar with it briefly so they can talk to the HCPs and receive the actual safety information and efficacy information from the healthcare providers. But all of that stuff is also happening in commercial teams. And then we have monitoring performance and managing of the product lifecycle, meaning the product can come into market, but you continuously have to think about how do I continuously bring value to this product along the way. You can't just bring the product to market and just say, we're done, we got to go to sleep, right? You have to bring it to market, then you have to make sure that it's being maintained. You have to make sure that the value is continuously going up. And what that says is, if I bring a drug to market, then I do more research to support maybe other indications or use in other population or whatever it might be, just making sure you're increasing the use for various areas that you have not previously considered now that the product is on the market. So you have to think about it, the entire cycle is of the actual process. So that's what commercial teams do. And so because a lot of people in this chat at least have not said that they're super familiar with this might be a little in depth, but I just want to make sure that you're clear when people say commercial or marketing teams, they don't just start when the drug is marketed. They start way before and working in the background, developing a lot of resources, a lot of innovative strategies to make sure when the drug is ready to hit the ground and actually come to market, to make sure everything goes smoothly. So I know I said a lot. I'm going to go a little bit in depth with the next slide for the specific roles that happen that actually exist in the pharmaceutical and the commercial areas. And then we will break for questions, as I know, again, we shared a lot. So there's sales. This is what you guys might have been most familiar with, meaning these are medical sales representatives. That's what a lot of companies in Africa call them. A lot of countries in Africa say the names as medical sales representatives from what I've seen in how they post the jobs. But basically, this is where you educate healthcare providers about the drug that's marketed already, right? That's the difference in medical commercials. Like salespeople can only speak to on-label marketed information. So they're there to communicate about that. But by that, what they're doing is they're expanding the knowledge of healthcare providers about this drug, meaning more HCPs or healthcare providers are prescribing this medication, meaning the revenue and profit is going up and the patients are also getting this medication. So it's really a business role, right, to help make sure that the drug is selling, but it's also education, awareness, and expansion of the use of the drug in the patient's use. Next, we have the marketing. So this is a lot of the strategy. So the sales team is the individual sales representatives going out into the market. The marketing is the people that are in the back end planning all of this so that they know the hiring of the field professionals, the training of the field professionals, the strategy for short-term product, for long-term product strategy, all of this happening. How do we want to launch it now that it's launched in the US? How do you want to launch it in Africa and emerging markets, in Japan, in Europe? So all of these things are being planned by the marketing team that is global, and also specific affiliates are working together to plan this as well. Next, we have market access. So whenever you think of market access, as the name suggests, it has to do with access, right? So what I mentioned when I brought up my fam Chandler here is that we want to make sure that patients actually get to, that drugs get to the patients he serves. So the market access team is continuously working in the background to design and deliver innovative pricing strategies and making sure that the patients have affordable medication, making sure that there's timely product fulfillment so that patients, like, let's say, obviously with therapies, you know that it's a continuous thing, right? You don't just get one drug and you're done. We hope everything was like that, but the reality is you have to be prescribed a drug, especially, for example, let's say you have diabetes. That's a continuous, sometimes lifelong type of management of the chronic disease. So with that being said, we have to make sure that patients have continuous fulfillment of drugs across the board. They're not just starting therapy and stopping therapy and impacting their health. So market access teams are making sure they actually create these strategies that allow patients to get access to the therapies that we work so hard to bring to market. Then we have business development, and I briefly shared this. Depending on what company you are, business development could be sitting under commercial, can sit under its own business development area. It really is dependent. So less focus on the fact that it's a commercial role and more focus on the fact that this is how the company accelerates its growth, right? By that, I mean, it's making sure that, okay, I'm not just satisfied with the things I have in my pipeline. How can I go out there and find things that actually make the pipeline I have stronger? So that could be by using technology. That could be by using testing. So I'll give you an example for my company. I'm in liver health, specifically non-alcoholic steatohepatitis or NASH, or fatty liver disease, or the progressive form of fatty liver disease. There's no drug currently for that particular disease. So the business development team is always working to see how can we not only, find better therapies, which my company is working to find partnerships or acquisitions, but also what are ways that we can improve the testing and screening for this disease? So it's not just about actually creating therapies. If patients are not getting screened and actually getting diagnosed, there's no way to give them the drug. So my company works with other companies that are actually diagnostic companies. So more patients are being screened for the disease, meaning more patients are diagnosed for the disease with the disease, meaning when the therapies are ready, then there's more available patients, more ready patients to take the therapy. So business development not just works in acquisitions or mergers or partnerships, but it also of therapies, but also in technology and also other various very innovative, very cool, newer things that are happening in the pharmaceutical industry right now. So again, a lot of stuff, mouthful. I want to stop here. The next question is, what skill sets do you think are needed in the commercial roles? But because a lot of us are maybe just now getting familiar with commercial role, I want to also say what interests you from the roles that you've seen. So Chandler, if you don't mind putting 2 questions, what interests you from the commercial roles that you've seen so far, 1, and then 2, what skill sets do you think are needed in the commercial roles that we've discussed so far? Because we're pharmacists, I want to make sure that we kind of get that discussion of like what's needed as well. So I'll put this up here. Please raise your hands, put it in the chat. Definitely, let's engage. You will know, I'm going to go back and ask, okay, for the skill sets, I think negotiation and communication skills. Absolutely. Great point. I think that, even if you want to sell shoes, you need the negotiation and communication skills, right? So the same thing with therapies, right? If you're in a sales team, you should be able to use your scientific knowledge and communicate the scientific data, but you should also be able to know how to communicate so that you're not just blowing the ears of your HCP where he's tired, don't want to hear you anymore and don't want to prescribe the drug, right? You also want to make sure you're negotiating with him on his time, his availability, his use of therapies and various things. So great point there. Sales and the business development are what interests you. Awesome. Chigabo? Oh my God. Chibo, I don't know if the G is silent. If you don't mind telling me how you pronounce your name, I would really appreciate that. I'm also learning how to pronounce a lot of names today. But yes, absolutely, sales, business, and communication skills are necessary. Confidence, presentation skill, wonderful, INNOVAMP. presentation skills are very key, right? Because we can know a lot about a specific area or a specific therapy, but if we're not able to present it in a concise and straightforward and appropriate, fair, balanced way, it doesn't matter as much. So that's important. Chinello, you said business development, some analytical skills. Wonderful. Yes, absolutely. And this is really fun. I mean, from my business development experience, I would sit on these meetings that make company-wide impact, right? Whether to take on or not to take on a specific company or acquisition is a huge deal. It's a billions and millions of dollar decision. So it really is like dependent on the safety, the cost, the efficacy of these therapies, but also whether or not the negotiation makes sense from a business perspective, right? So absolutely. Patience. Oh my goodness, that is, I need that skill for not only pharmaceutical and professional, but also personal, right? So I think that is a skill set for everything. Some say marriage too. I'm not married, but I'm sure Chandra can attest to the fact that patience is needed everywhere. Trifina, you said building relationship with health professionals. Absolutely. Very, very essential. I think you hit it right on the head, because the reality is it's not just reaching out to health professionals and saying, hey, I want to sell you this particular medication. It's making sure that they're comfortable with you as a person and they're comfortable with what you have to say. That means they trust you. They have built rapport with you. That's the only way that they can actually listen to you. So absolutely believe that building relationships is necessary. Enox, you said market access for a skill set and you're interested in sales. Absolutely. Awesome. Interpersonal skills. I cannot emphasize that enough. That's necessary in every single role in the pharmaceutical industry. And that's because the reality is, no matter how smart we are, if we're not able to interact well with our colleagues, if we're not able to work collaboratively, if we're not able to communicate our thoughts for decision making, it's tough. And I think that it doesn't matter actually if you're in the pharmaceutical industry or not, right, Chandler? So it really is anywhere, and absolutely agree with that. Collaboration, Sylvia, absolutely. Time management. Wow, you guys are just hitting it right on the head. Really, really great answers. Love that. Love the engagement. Thank you so much, everyone. Exactly. So if you have any questions about this, again, feel free to put in the chat, or you can also wait until our breakout rooms to get a little bit deeper into some of these roles or some of the opportunities that are actually in clinical and commercial roles. Awesome. Let's keep it pushing. This is very exciting. I'm loving the engagement. Thank you guys so much, and keep it coming. Now, my personal favorite, just kidding, but it is my favorite person, medical affairs, right? Medical affairs is a really, really unique place. It really takes on broad responsibility of scientific and clinical expertise to basically support the entire commercialization process. I intentionally kept the picture at the top of the product development cycle or process or stages, right? That's because medical affairs is really along all of this processes, meaning if I have an insight about a particular medication or a particular compound that we should look into for liver disease, then I will tell that to my company. My company will take that insight and they will tell it to their basic research development teams, and that feeds into that, right? If I have a particular insight when I'm talking to my doctors and I realize this would be good to know for our clinical development program and how to improve it, I tell our clinical development team, and they literally take it up the chain to make it happen so that our clinical development program is better. So along the way, every single thing that we do, medical affairs is involved. Just like the previous conversations we've had, remember that everything is connected, right? So particularly in pharma, closer to late phase clinical development, meaning phase 2, phase 3 is really when I started in my company when my drug was phase 2. So coming to usually it's typically phase 2, you don't see as many medical affair involvement as far as field medical in phase 1, but really executing the medical strategy, creating the medical strategy first, and executing medical strategy across the launch roadmap throughout the entire drug development process, supporting clinical trial activities, building key relationship. This was already brought up in our chat. Absolutely great point. Whether you're in sales, whether you're in medical, whether you're commercial, whether you're clinical, relationships are key. But specifically within medical, we have that opportunity to build relationship with key opinion leaders and other stakeholders. There's also really great ways of planning and developing materials for multi-channel medical education, engagement on disease, unmet need, product rationale, meaning it's really medical affairs responsibility to educate HCPs. Let's say for me, I particularly meet with hepatologists and gastroenterologists. So they're specialists who know a lot about the liver already. So for me, it's less about specifically educating them, but I do educate them on our pipeline. I educate them on our specific therapies that we are looking in the clinical trials. I would educate them about some of the exciting things that we have going on to support patients. So there's so many things that you could educate on, even when you're talking to a super specialist like hepatologists and GIs, right? There's also, as far as the multi-channel education, you also support medical affairs in general, the umbrellas. And again, depending on the company, it's different, but you really support the dissemination of grants and funding to organizations that are putting disease education out there. So it's not just your company bringing this information to the public about this disease, it's also by giving funds and support to other associations and organizations, they also educate their communities on specifically liver disease, for example, in my company, right? Not only that, it's also investing in real world generation to support the value. And this is what I mentioned earlier, even on the commercial side, the company's always looking for ways to increase the value proposition, meaning the value of the product once it's already out in the market. They don't just do that by researching simple, basic research, but also real world evidence. Now that it's out in the market, what are ways that this drug is actually being used? Is it always used in the way that it's actually approved? Is it being off label? If it's off label, why is it being used off label? And how can we actually take that to our advantage and bring it into some other ways of doing research and understanding the drug better and bringing it, maybe getting an approval for another indication, right? Also, or let's say for our particular therapy, and again, I'm not going to mention the therapy for the sake of compliance, but for our particular company, a drug was approved for diabetes, right? But then later it was brought to market and we did cardiovascular outcome trial to make sure that it actually is cardioprotective, right? So that gives us a huge value to the drug because a lot of patients who have diabetes also are high cardiovascular risk. So if I'm giving, if a healthcare provider is giving them a particular medication that is approved for diabetes, but with cardioprotective traits, then that's taking the value from just being a diabetes drug to now a whole cardiovascular risk reduction drug, right? So that is all stuff that medical affairs team do along the way as well by getting in insights. Okay, now in the beginning, if I'm talking to my HCPs and diabetes and I say, this drug is approved for diabetes, and my HCP or endocrinologist, he says, that's great, but I'm really worried about the cardio effects on the cardiovascular risk. That's probably what I will take to my company. And I tell my company, HCPs are very concerned about the cardiovascular risk for diabetic patients, meaning, or for patients with diabetes, meaning, what are we doing to actually show that our drugs are cardioprotective? So these are the kind of things that actually incite research and actually show the value again, that is added benefit. So again, I spent a little bit more time on medical affairs, but my point is medical affairs is really, really an excellent place, especially for healthcare professionals such as ourselves, for pharmacists, and there's so many roles along the way in medical affairs to get involved. So let's get a little bit in depth into what are the different common medical affairs roles. So let's start with field. I want you to kind of think about it like a tree, right? So you have medical affairs, you have in-house, meaning people who work from really the home office. And then you have people that are more remote or field. So they're the ones going out to talk to healthcare professionals, meaning they get cars to drive out and to speak to healthcare professionals, right? So kind of dividing it into those roles will help you understand that there's those that sit in the main office and do strategy. They do a lot of work how to support those that are going out into the field. It's basically like, if you were in the military, you have your, main head of director of strategy for the military strategic operations. And then you have the actual soldiers going out there and executing. The soldiers are really like field medical. And the people that are doing the strategy to plan out the war plan, that's like the in-house medical strategy people, right? So that's the best way I learned it. And I hope that helps you kind of keep a perspective. But let's start with field medical. I'm an MSL, so maybe that's why I put field medical first. But really, field medical affairs is really building and maintaining those key relationship with key opinion leaders And to give you a definition of key opinion leaders are anyone who are experts in their field. So for me, because I'm in liver health, hepatologists and GIs are my key opinion leaders. If I was in diabetes, endocrinologists and other primary care physicians could also be my key opinion leaders. So it really has to do, the way we define key opinion leaders have to do with their expertise, with their influence, with their publications, with their research in a particular therapy area. So that could be anything that is diabetes, obesity, whatever it might be, right? And we also support clinical trials. And now I want to bring your attention to the managed market liaison. Managed markets are very similar to us, but instead of talking to HCPs, meaning endocrinologists and the specific specialists or even primary care, they're talking to the customers of like payers, managed care organizations, employer groups. So they're kind of impacting wider range, but on a different scale than particularly patient-specific conversations with HCPs, right? So these are two different roles, but I just want to give you an idea that they're both field roles that actually sit within medical affairs. We have the medical strategy, which is what I mentioned, being like the people that sit and plan the war for the entire year, right? So really this is like execute the plan to support the development, launch, and life cycle management of the product. And this comes in various ways. This could even be like the pharmaceutical industry company working closely with an association to develop a care pathway so that patients have, or guidelines, or have an impact on guidelines, so that like we are very integrated into a lot of the processes and making sure the disease is continuing to be comprehensively handled through various avenues. We also have medical information. Medical information is basically who handles the inquiry. So pharmacists, great option in medical information. This is, you create response letters. You are actually might be the person when somebody calls the company to speak to somebody within the company with expertise about the particular medication or the particular question that they may have. These are the medical information colleagues. Next is health economics outcomes research. HEOR is actually a really, really big field. And if we had time, I would separate it and put it by itself because it could take a long time to talk about it. But for simplicity's sake, I put it under medical affairs simply to talk about the fact that it's still about adding value to the actual medication before it comes to market, and specifically also after it comes to market. They're responsible for generating, interpreting, communicating high quality customer-centric medical evidence, supporting assets from early development all the way to post-marketing. And so some of the economic studies that you think of is like cost effectiveness studies, right? So there's a lot of things, or modeling or budget modeling. I forget all the simple ones. I'm not a health economic expert, been in that briefly, but the point is there's so many ways that they support the actual bringing value to the specific therapy by adding real world evidence generation. There's also a field component called health outcomes liaison. They're very similar to managed market liaison, but they actually could be the ones doing the research based on some of the insights they gain themselves. Last but not least, we have medical operations. These are the people that are project managers, that are administrators, the people that are actually the backbones to a lot of the great things that are happening. So they define processes, they do policy documentation, reporting, key activities, they respond to budget planning and oversights. All of these things are handled by operations. So I think, as you can tell, operations is just really what they do, except they're in medical specific area. One thing that I didn't mention is like training. So the people that train the colleagues on different teams that train me as a medical affairs professional, or specifically medical science liaison, I'm trained by someone to know how to understand the data myself, and also to know how to communicate the data with my healthcare providers. So there's a lot of people, there's a lot of specific teams that on medical affairs that actually sit to create the materials that we're going to use, to train us on the materials that they created on how to use them. So there's also medical materials creation, as well as trainers and medical affairs team. They usually sit within the medical strategy team as well. So again, lots of information here, but the key thing is that pharmacists can play a role in any of these awesome ideas, from creating and designing health economic models, to supporting, building relationship with key opinion leaders, to handling medical information inquiries, to actually supporting the entire launch and life cycle of products. So I'll pause here. I have, of course, a question for you, right? As you expect by now, but I want to ask you a little bit different question. Of course, the first question always remains, from what you've learned from medical affairs, what interests you the most so far and why? You don't have to answer the why, you can answer one. And then the second question is, what do you anticipate being some of the challenges of working in a medical affairs team? Like if you are working in a medical affairs team, what challenges do you anticipate facing, right? So that's just to kind of get your opinions and thoughts on, these are some of the things that I find to be challenging if I was working in medical affairs, but of course I want to hear about what interests you as well. So I want to pause here. Chandra, I don't know if you got a chance to already comment in the chat. I want to go back a couple of slides back. Okay, I'll leave it here.
Okay, so concerning what interests me about the medical affairs, I find medical operations very interesting because it's talks about defining processes and policies and documentations. And earlier this year, I attended a policy training. So I've kind of like picked up interest in policy making and policy implementation. So I'm quite surprised that it's actually this under medical affairs.
Well, to give a little bit of a clear thing, there's also regulatory policy. That's more having to do with the company working with health authorities and so forth. But to your point, this is also still about documentation, reporting processes, and budget. So I think some of the things that excite you in that skill set is still used as well.
All right.
Awesome. I see Anna said that HEOR interests you. So health economics and outcomes research in short is HEOR for the letters there. So that's great to hear. I see MSL. I hear they're paid a lot. I'm not gonna lie, the money's good. I'm just kidding, but yeah, so the money is good too, but I think that ultimately the experience is really good. It's a great position to start if you want to progress in your career to different areas. But what I do want to emphasize is there's a lot of people who start in different areas before they come into being an MSL. So don't get don't feel defeated if you don't see those jobs accepting without previous experience, because there's a lot of ways to get to it, and we can talk about it a little bit further. For the sake of time, I'm going to move a little bit more complex route to becoming an MSL. Yes, Carson, I totally understand, but we definitely can talk about it in the groups, in the rooms. So let me move on for the sake of time. I see Chandler giving me the eye in the corner. I'm just kidding. So last but not least is regulatory affairs, right? So early in the development process or research gate, it's critical to have the regulatory affairs involvement. And this is to ensure that the clinical development strategy is developed with really careful planning along the series of clinical trials, making sure the first in human phase 1 or phase 2, which is kind of like proof of concept, right? Or phase 3, which is really the pivotal trial. Through all of those series of processes or stages of clinical development, you are actually making sure you're meeting the guidelines. You're not being non-compliant to the specific policies and regulations that health authorities have set, so that when you're ready to apply for the new drug application, you're actually good to go, right? So that's what regulatory affairs team do, but it's not just that. They are also about obtaining, of course, regulatory approval for the product, and then making sure that we're meeting the actual timely commercialization. As in, if regulatory affairs teams are not working in the back end from early stages to make sure that everything is good, then by the time you're ready to bring the drug to market, you're not really ready, because it's such, I mean, you can imagine how many lengthy documents are in regulatory affairs, right? So it's just one of those things that is key to a successful clinical phase and a successful and timely commercialization of a particular therapy. So I want to go a little bit in depth within the roles. So we have pharmacovigilance, which a lot of you might be familiar, but it's basically drug safety, right? And it's responsible for safety surveillance, adverse event reporting, clinical trial safety management, maintaining of regulation and guidelines. Again, heavy on making sure that there's safe use of the medications and that if there is adverse events, that is reported appropriately. Again, this is very clear that as pharmacists and healthcare professionals, it's right up our alley. The next thing is policy, regulatory intelligence. I know Sanyola, you mentioned this. Again, sorry for your name. But basically, it provides strategy and guidance for global commercialization programs by leading the communication between the company and health authorities. That could be in the particular affiliate, but also globally. So again, really, really understanding the policies around specific procedures that takes to bring the drug to market, but also the policies and kind of making sure that there's country specific public health policies. There's so many things that pharmaceutical industry companies have to be aware of. Next is the advertising and promo. This is depending on the market, but really advertising and promo is responsible for strategic, well-balanced and timely advice from a regulatory perspective on the materials used. So the sales team uses materials to talk to HCPs. That material has to be well vetted by the regulatory affairs professionals before it hits the market so that it's not communicating anything in a wrong or unbalanced way. So that's what advertising promotional do, but it's not just for physical papers that we pass out, but it could also be for advertisement on TV and so far. Then we have CMC, which is chemistry, manufacturing, control. This is really the detail, the quality section of correctly resolving any type of challenges, proposing regulatory sound solutions. But again, going in detail to the actual kind of the manufacturing aspect of the regulatory process. So again, a lot of different areas for pharmaceutical industry, for pharmacists to actually be involved in this industry, in the regulatory affairs processes. But here are some of the roles that are more commonly seen in the regulatory affairs. Of course, I have one last thing, which is regulatory writing. And that is, you will be responsible for developing some of the regulatory documents that are needed for drug development and marketing authorization. Again, very key piece. So if you're really good at writing, this potentially could be the role for you. So one last question, right? Which functional areas do you see regulatory affairs team collaborating with? And then of course, what areas interest you the most? Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. Anything that interests you specifically from regulatory affairs? Oh, let me go back.
Actually, I find regulatory writing interesting because I'm actually a writer.
That's awesome. Yes, regulatory writing is a great place, especially because if you're really good at writing, if you're really good at process documentation, this is the perfect role for you. Pharmacovigilance, yes, absolutely. I think pharmacists are really well equipped to be able to lead in that role as well. So keep coming in the chat. For the sake of time, I'm going to move to the next thing. And again, keep in mind, we have the opportunity to discuss this a little bit more later, advertising and promo. It's super fun, I hear, in advertising and promo. So you get to look at all these cool documents or cool materials, as well as like, you know, promotional videos and so forth. So absolutely. Okay, so on a more practical note, now that we're done with our functional area overview or deep dives, let's talk about the tips to help you secure opportunities in the pharmaceutical industry, right? So the first thing I would say is research and identify which roles interest you.
No, I prefer happy, but easy bite is more popular. Sure.
So the first thing I would say is definitely research and identify which roles are interesting to you. And with that being said, really, this is the kind of way, like what we did today is the best way to explore it. You're looking and researching, and now based on some of the things I presented, you are going to take that and do your own deep dive to see which other roles interest you in the pharmaceutical industry. This is a very important step because, oh, post-market surveillance, awesome. Yeah. This is a very important step because when you're trying to apply for jobs, especially if you're applying for US jobs and you're in Africa, it's important that you're really, really specific about your need or your interests so that you can actually identify those jobs that are going to get you to the US role. So it's important you know your why, or you know where you're going. The next is building your network. And I think that being a part of INNOVAMP, being a part of PILS, is a great place to start. With that being said, that means that you use your LinkedIn. I see all of your names. One of the things I will do after this call is I'm going to go find you on LinkedIn. And if your LinkedIn is not up to par, I will be commenting and saying you need to make your LinkedIn pop, right? So that's the key, is make sure you build your network. And for you, being not physically present in the US or in an area where a lot of pharmaceutical industry companies might be, using LinkedIn is the best way to make it happen. So definitely use your LinkedIn, identify specific websites that have great jobs, and go to networking opportunities and so forth to make sure that you're building your network and maintaining and building relationships as well. The next thing is applying for internships, exchange programs, fellowships, grants, jobs, all of that. It's very important that you actually don't discount any opportunity if it's going to get you into the door, because once you're in the door, you could really make your way up, right? So make sure, even if it's an internship and you feel like, I might take a little bit of a pay cut here. And of course, this is not to comment on personal situations. It's important that you definitely look for and apply for some of these opportunities and see where that takes you. Last but not least is do not give up. If that's your ultimate goal, is to secure a job in the pharmaceutical industry, there's so many ways to make it happen. And it's really about seeking the right resources, the right help from individuals to help you get there. So do not feel defeated. It might take a long time, but you will get there. Awesome. So in short, to wrap up, right, the 3 gems that I will leave you with today is pharmacists can make an impact along every stage, at every stage of the drug development process. Every functional area that you see today is connected and works very much in close collaboration, right? And then also, last but not least, using your network and connections, not just in the specific country that you're in Africa, but also in the US, through PILS, through INNOVAMP, to really work to get into the industry. People are key to obtaining a lot of the jobs that I've gotten. So even while in the US, it's not because my CV is great that I got here. It's because of the fact that I reached out and actually sought out these experiences and skill sets. These experiences from people to get me to where I am today. So now to the fun part, which is let's connect. So we have rooms today. We have 2 breakout rooms. In the breakout rooms, there's one which is pharmaceutical industry opportunities, and then there's future gems. So I will be leading the pharmaceutical industry opportunities room, and Chandler will be leading the future gems, which is going to be discussing a lot of awesome things that we're going to be doing in the future. When you get into the breakout rooms, introduce yourself, your name, your school, or what school you graduated from, and what your career is now, and what your goal or aspirations are, and your location. So we're going to build upon some of those things that we talked about today in these rooms.
And thank you everyone for being on the call with us. We know that we're a little bit over time, but it's just such an amazing topic and discussion that we had to get it all out today so that you can get the most out of their presentation as well. So we thank you for staying on with us as well. And Dr. Adere is gonna share some more opportunities for you.
The actual, the opportunities that I put here are very geared towards those that are living in Africa currently, in Nigeria. I just kind of selected Nigeria as I kind of know INNOVAMP's, concentration of participants or attendees, but really just think about ways to get involved in associations. That's one of the first things I thought about, because they already have certain programs. So for example, the International Federation for Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Associations, if you were to click on that link, Chandler, it will take you to they work specifically with certain countries that are like South Africa, I believe Ivory Coast, and a few other countries. I think it's maybe 2, 3. But if you are from one of those countries and you can be a part of this association, learn more about the opportunities, work even for the association as well, right? So this is what I was talking about. If you, basically kindly share the file. Yes, we definitely will. So you can explore it, but you can see, pause right there. It says research-based pharmaceutical companies and associations across the globe. So what you're doing is you're not specifically going to one pharmaceutical company, but you're going to an association that actually connects pharmaceutical companies and associations across the globe. So you really get a chance to work or be employed by various institutions that work with this organization. And like I said, I identified only 4 countries that are members of the IFPMA. I believe that's Ghana, Kenya, Ivory Coast, and one other country. Oh, South Africa. It's only 4 of them. So if you're from one of those 4 countries, or you live in those states, or you know of friends, definitely suggested. Yes, there you go. Click on the Africa map. There you go. So as you can see, it's I believe it's Ghana, South Africa, Kenya, and Ivory Coast, as I mentioned. So those are the only ones they're members of it, but it doesn't mean that they don't plan to expand, or doesn't mean that they don't work with other countries. So definitely just explore to see what's out there, because it's a great place to get connected to other places. Again, I don't know too much to give you super detailed information, but it helps to identify what those are. Like even the, yeah, I'll just stop there with that one. And then Chandler, you can go back to the main document. If you look at the International Pharmaceutical Students Federation, please click on that. See what I'm saying? So you have that opportunity to join as a member, but also to join as an organization and open up that opportunity for people in your institution as well. So membership organization, oh, okay, it's not accepting applications, but at some point they used to. So keep that in mind, right? And then also, if you know of anyone that used to be a part of this, you can also do like, go back to the previous one. And so then the next thing I did also is like, let me go to the clinical development one real quick. I want to show that job. So if you click on that, this is something I just, like right before we came on the call, I just quickly clicked on it to see if it would have to be on LinkedIn, I think, but just to show you like a CRO type of job. This is a clinical research associate. We talked about in clinical development programming, we talked about clinical research associate jobs, right? So like, basically, this is actually in Lagos, Nigeria, which some of you guys mentioned. This was posted a month ago, so I'm not sure if it's actually still active. But if you click on see more from the about job, I just kind of want to tell them a little bit more about this. So clinical research associate, CRA at 54 Gin. This is the clinical research associate that we talked about. It plays a key contributing role to the support by supporting and contributing to all aspects of clinical and regulatory department activities for assigned studies. You're responsible for achieving successful execution of assigned studies, accordance with good clinical practice, applicable to regional guidelines, so forth. Again, this is very, very, very good, right? So this is a way for you to enter into the pharmaceutical industry by doing a clinical research associate job. And I'll be honest, in the pharmaceutical industry company that I work in, some of them are not PharmDs. They don't even have that many deep science backgrounds. That shows that you're already ahead of the game. So with that being said, these companies, if you have if you have a specific experience that makes you stand out, meaning you are PharmD already, you're already a great candidate for this. Do you mind going down a little bit? I just want to show them. So requirements, bachelor's degree, right? The CRA certification is not even a must, it's a plus, right? If you have it, great. And honestly, if I were you, I would definitely do that. It says it's 1 year of clinical operations, but you can volunteer, you can shadow, right? There's so many ways to obtain this, but basically it's only asking for 1 year, and it's actually not as bad as like what other companies ask for. So think about ways that you can make this happen for yourself by looking at companies like 54 Gin that actually take in students at Lagos directly where you're working. And that gives you an entryway into other opportunities somewhere else. All right, Chandler, go back to the main page for the sake of time. And then the bottom, actually, you don't need to go in depth or even click it. But at the bottom, I just included some links that I found helpful when you're thinking about visas for pharmacists or other US-based companies, countries, not companies, jobs that have like companies that have visa-friendly companies, right? Meaning those, for example, when I was applying for jobs myself, I was in a citizen of the US, I only had a green card. So there were companies that were better for me than other companies because of some of the requirements. And so although most companies take green card, I was at that time facing like, possibly not having my green card anymore. So I was looking at companies who would be willing to give me sponsorship. So this gives you some of the list of companies that might be available, and you would have to browse through it to see what that is. But this is a really great source to kind of deal with some of the, they're not just pharmaceutical companies, but pharmaceutical companies are also on there. I believe like Pfizer, AbbVie, Bristol Myers Squibb are some of the companies that are rated to actually being providing visa sponsorships somehow, but don't quote me on that as they might come at me later. But yeah, I think those are good. And then let's go back to the main document real quickly. FDA. So I say FDA because they have actually some great opportunities for foreign trained professionals as well. So click these links when we send them out, look at it as well. And then some just general links at the top. So as you can see, for regulatory affair, for medical affairs, for commercial, I just put jobs that I find to be great for you guys. So if you don't mind clicking the second job under sales jobs in Nigeria, this was just posted 4 days ago. I mean, yes, it definitely has a lot of applicants, but the whole point is this is one of the commercial roles I was speaking about. So you can actually apply for something like this. If you don't mind clicking on see more so we can look at the details a little bit. Basically, it's exactly what we talked about, the promoting of the Viatris portfolio of products and healthcare professionals, target customers. You're doing that in your own country, in your own cities, and you're building your skill sets while you're there. And Viatris is, I might be saying the company name wrong, but the point is this company is a global company. So I know, for example, like, at least in Africa, it's very well known. I know somebody that works in Dubai office. So you might have a chance to go to different offices, different areas, different regions and territories and work and expand your skill sets while you're there so that you can use that to come to the US or to go to Europe or something else. But the point is, as you can see, this job was posted 4 days ago, meaning it's an actual position readily available for pharmacists who are looking to get into the pharmaceutical industry, specifically in the sales representative role within the commercial function area. So really great to look at and see. And again, very not extensive search, but it says that you just need a bachelor's for this. I know somebody asked me in the chat, do I need a PharmD? Clearly not in this case, right? You just need a bachelor's in biological sciences, preferably pharmacy. So you already a preferred person in this case. And it says you need some type of, experience, but the reality is you can make that experience be something like you help sell medications in the retail pharmacy, even though that's not directly sales, you can sell it to that. Like, don't undercount your own experiences. If you work in retail pharmacy in Lagos or in any other part of Nigeria, you can say that you've been a part of selling medications directly to patients as a pharmacist with a background in science and with the understanding of the therapeutic area. And you understand what sales is. You can compound that with saying, I also sell car pieces. I also sell, sell yourself. I also sell, let's say you sell like, I don't know, books on the side. Basically use your skills, talk about your retail experience, merge it and saying, I already have the book selling experience. So you have the direct retail experience, and then you have the direct pharmacy experience, merge it to get these type of opportunities. Again, so many ways to do that, and continue to work with INNOVAMP, continue to work with Pills to help you identify some of these goals. Continue to come to these gem sessions so you can get some of the real life, practical, tangible solutions for some of your job needs and searches that you're trying to do. So I hope this was really helpful, but we'll send out the link. Definitely look at it. Some of them give you just a general overview, and some of them actually go in depth about the visa processes and other technical things. So with that being said, I'm even willing to share my presentation with you guys, so we can have that for you as a background as well. Anything else? Any other final thoughts? I know we're at 2. I know Chandler's like, you already pushing it with the time.
First and foremost, does anyone have any questions or comments based on, all the amazing information that Dr. Yani Adere just went over? And if not, any questions, any comments, feedback, anything like that, that'd be awesome to hear from you. A resource document be shared with us? Yes, it will. And I just put it in the chat, and we're going to put it in the Telegram, and we're also going to email it out to everyone that was on the call.
Yeah, and I will say follow us on social media, follow us on LinkedIn. If I were you, the best way to get your LinkedIn game up is to recap on some of the great things you learned. So if I were you, I would go on LinkedIn and talk about, here are some things I learned from this gem session with Pills, with INNOVAMP, and we will share it. When the more we share your stuff, I have a lot of followers on LinkedIn. I'm sure Chandler does too. Our Pills account, INNOVAMP has too. the more you get, people looking at your name, and exposure is very key. So my challenge to you guys is definitely take to LinkedIn, not just our group chat or our Telegram accounts, but take to LinkedIn to literally say, hey, these are some of the quick things I learned from this chat, from this event that happened. And that way we're exposing what we're doing. But in addition to that, we're also giving exposure to your name by sharing your stuff on our Pills account, even on my personal account as well. Feel free to tag Pills Connect. Feel free to tag myself. That's my name on there. We're putting Pills Connect on LinkedIn. There you go. Chandra already bit me to it. That's perfect. And then most importantly, also take a survey that Chandler has shared. It will be shared in all Telegram, but this will help us get better in how we serve you guys as a whole.
Amazing, amazing. And I want to say that someone already said, Greatman said, I was considering options for the pharmaceutical industry. This class has more than helped. So Dr. Yani Adere has impacted so many people on this call, and we really appreciate you for being a part of it. Before I close out, I wanted to open it up one more time to see if there's any more comments. Elizabeth said, I'm speechless. A big thank you to Dr. Yani, INNOVAMP, and Pills. INNOVAMP said, I literally have to see his video recording. Don't want to miss anything. Too loaded. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. All right. I really, like I said, once again, we thank you for, taking these 2 hours with us. I mean, I think these are some of the most impactful 2 hours we can make with each other, of us all learning and going through different opportunities and learning from an amazing specialist, that being Dr. Yani Adere. And I gotta have everyone on this call, please help me give a round of applause for Dr. Adere for the hard work and the dedication she has shared with you all today and her expertise. So please help me give her a round of applause. She deserves her flowers. Let's see those flowers. Thank you.
Thanks, Chandler. We appreciate you for getting us connected to even have the opportunity and the platform to share these gems with each other. So thank you for you as well.
Oh, no, I appreciate it. And once again, please, give her flowers. She did so much for us, and also give the flowers to INNOVAMP. This is not possible without INNOVAMP and their cohort and what they've been able to do. And we also want to thank everyone involved from Pills, Pharmacy Initiative leaders. We are working hard for you, and that's what we're all about. So last logistical things, please complete the post-connection survey to evaluate Dr. Adere and also how you have grown from this experience. We definitely want to hear from you. And in that survey, you can also say what you want to hear more about. What are some overall comments that you have about the GEM program so far? We're 2 sessions in, and we're only going to continue to do more for you and your colleagues. And I want to point out that the best way we can get this experience out and this program out is by you. You doing one-on-ones and one-on-one marketing with your fellow colleagues, with people you feel like they can benefit from talks just like this. So we need you to help us out in getting more people in, because this is quality right here. And I think everyone needs to see this. So without further ado, also please follow up with us on Telegram. Be on the lookout for more emails on these resources and this document. And for one and all, I will say have a happy GEM Saturday and have a happy weekend. And we'll look forward to seeing you in October. We're going to be having mental health from Dr. Brian Saki. And in November, we're going to be having professional and personal branding from Dr. Sydney Neba. So we got some calls and some sessions lined up for you. So be on the lookout and spread the word. You all have a great rest of your Saturday. And once again, thank you for being a part of GEM.
Thank you guys so much. Don't forget, tag us,
Tag
us, all of that. Thank you guys so much.
All right.